All right, hi everybody. Today is Wednesday, September 29th, and you are at the SIG K8s Infra bi-weekly meeting. I am your host, Aaron Kirkenberger, aka Aaron of SIG Beard, also known as SpiffXP at all the places. And we are all being we're all being recorded. This meeting will be posted to YouTube publicly later, and we can all go watch ourselves adhere to the Kubernetes Code of Conduct by basically being our very best selves to each other. We have kind of a full agenda today, but before we do all the regular stuff, I wanted to hand over to Arnaud, who has a special guest for us. You are muted right now, Arnaud.
Hi, everyone. Sorry, but my special guest is Jimmy Angel, and 6 months ago, he opened a pull request about DNS. So I wanted to talk about this and try to see if we can get that merge to this week or maybe the next week. So where's the pull request? I think Jim needs some kind of introduction.
Yeah, I can give a quick intro. I'm definitely honored and it's a privilege to be called a special guest. I don't think it's that serious, but much appreciated. I'm Jim Angel, active in SIG Docs and SIG Release. I've seen some of you folks around in the community. And yeah, so one of the things that came in to the security channel for SIG Docs recently, or I should say, 6 months ago or so, was the lack of CAA records on the Kubernetes.io domain. And for those who aren't very familiar with CAA records, it is basically the validating authority of who can issue certificates against any FQDN or any domain. And what happens is you can have a list of certificate authorities that are of like a approved list of who can issue Kubernetes.io certificates. And today there's nothing set. So for example, if you had a way to validate ownership by either running a service or DNS queries or some sort of way to circumvent this, you could potentially issue a certificate representing that service as being Kubernetes.io. It is security best practice to limit your CAA records to only the CAs, the certificate authorities that are issuing certificates for your DNS itself. So where this becomes a little bit challenging and where I'm a little on the fence for is the fact of the matter is we don't have any record of who all is requesting certificates on behalf of Kubernetes.io. And also let me take a step back saying that right now the PR that is proposed is for Kubernetes.io, but we'd also do the same thing with K8s.io as well. And so to the best of our ability, there is a public log of all the certificates issued. I don't know the time frame of how far back that public log goes to. You can search this public log or public records of all the certificates issued for domains. And what I came back with on the Kubernetes.io one was Google PKI at some point in the past handful of years has asked for a certificate based on Kubernetes.io, as well as Let's Encrypt, which is the certificate provider for Netlify. And so I have those two right now as being the certificate authorities of choice in the CAA of the approved list, which means if there's anything else out in the wild that is creating certificates for Kubernetes.io that is not one of those two CAs, it will fail once that PR merges. I think the risk is relatively low in the sense of we can easily revert this. My fear or my reluctancy would be unintended consequences. I can't foresee any, especially when we're talking certificates. And hopefully I'm not foot gunning here, but when we're talking about certificates, hopefully the renewal process and the actual act of issuing certificates isn't done just in time. It's done before a certificate expires, before a service goes live, or something of that nature. So I anticipate it to be a very low risk. One thing that I commented in the PR is we could send out a message to the wider Kubernetes KDev community if we wanted. My fear is that it might be unnecessary noise in the wider community. It might raise concern that it's not needed. However, I'm not really against the idea one way or the other. So we can definitely raise visibility if we think it would help, and it adds, more signal and less noise, in my opinion. and I think we merge this. We see what happens. If nothing, within a week or two, we open the K8s.io PR, merge that, And we might even consider at some point even trimming that down, because as of right now, I'm only aware of Netlify being the issuer of Kubernetes.io and K8s.io certificates.
Okay. Yeah, I've sort of dragged my feet on pressing that approve button because I didn't understand the full context of the change. And I appreciate you coming by to explain it. I think you sort of provided that on the PR as well. I just hadn't felt, I didn't feel like I had consensus from enough people to say like, let's just merge it and find out what happens. So for your historical context for the thing on who's issued certificates, we used to use Cert Manager to issue certificates through Let's Encrypt for a bunch of the apps that we run on the community cluster. We no longer do that, thanks in large part to heroics by Arnaud and Tim Hawken. We now use GKE's managed certificates for the majority of our stuff. I think we have one lone Cert Manager instance hanging out there that still goes through Let's Encrypt. I agree with the, like, I was planning on pressing the approve button during this meeting. And just, I think it's raising the signal maybe sounds like a good idea. I view it as an asking forgiveness, not permission sort of thing. Just like, hey, FYI, if any of you were doing something strange, like trying to issue your own Kubernetes.io certificate and that broke, please come talk to us. And then I agree with letting that soak for a bit, and then doing the same thing with K8s.io. This all sounds totally reasonable.
Cool, that sounds good to me. The one other thing, I don't think we're going to get an answer here, is looking at historical records of who's issued certificates for these domains. K8s.io also includes AWS PKI or CA certificate authority. I have no context on where that issuer would have came from. At some point that happened. I don't know if it's actively happening, but one of my ideas being is let's not break anything that previously is existing in those historical records. We'll include those as being allowed per se, and then we could potentially evaluate and make the move from there. But wanted to raise awareness. I thought that was a little funky from the K8s.io perspective.
That is. I'm curious if you, maybe I just didn't see it, if you have links to sort of the forensics that you did to go look up, you know, how you determined this, I guess.
Yeah, definitely. And it's in the PR, I believe. I'll pull out the exact link because I had this giant synopsis of how I was testing because I wasn't totally comfortable with OctoDNS. And so it's buried in there. Let me figure out what that actual link is.
Okay.
And it's still relatively new to me as well. I'm not sure exactly where this historical record is kept, how it's maintained, where the data is coming from. But the fact that it did return the actively valid ones that I was aware of, plus some I wasn't aware of, made me feel pretty confident in the details. But I'll send a link in chat.
With two domain validation for one subdomain, and this is living inside the Amazon account, but I don't know which one. We need to talk to people. Basically, the only people using that are mainly the folks from, I would say, COPS, but by default, it's SIG cluster lifecycle.
Okay.
Let me find the definition of this domain validation quickly.
Awesome. Jim, as SIGDoc person, you might have context on the next DNS related PR I wanted to unblock as well. Basically, there was a request put in eons ago to get Kubernetes.io Search Console access for the website for SIGDocs maintainers, so that you could better understand like who's using the website and how. And that seemed like a perfectly reasonable request, but it was like vaguely unclear who already had access to it or something. I feel at this point, I have the same kind of brazen, Arnaud has a PR up that verifies the site for a Kubernetes.io account that we own. And from there, I think we can work on delegating that out. I think, I'm not sure this one requires as much visibility to Kubernetes dev in terms of raising signal. I think I am gonna go make sure Tim Hawken and some of the other usual suspects are made aware of this. But since I'm going to YOLO one DNS PR, why not two? But I don't know if anybody from SIG like remembers that this request was made or would have evil plans on how to use it once we got that done. Throwing that out.
And just some quick context on that. So I believe there were just some, early doc days before my time, before a lot of folks' times. I think when docs was stood up, the Google team that was actually owning that search console that was used, I believe either moved on, different roles, different jobs outside of the Kubernetes community. And we ultimately got to a point where I was working with Zach on getting a new set of tools, getting plugged into analytics, you name it. And so I think this is just an artifact of the folks who previously had access have moved on, and that access is no longer given to the current docs co-chairs right now. And I think there's a few of these that might come through. I have no problem with them merging as is, but I believe the historical context that's missing here is those that did have access went away. The people who needed the new access fixed a lot of the issues, but not for the Search Console specifically. And I think that kind of has went by the wayside, and there hasn't been a big need from SIG docs to get deeper into that. So
okay,
I think that's the context that's missing there.
Okay, I super appreciate that. Cool, thanks so much for your time, Jim. Arnaud, and
just want to give some context about the domain validation. So when I opened here, I didn't realize Search Console can share basically the domain validation. So it's look like anyone with a GCP account and access to case.io can do the validation. So we can close it and call it and say, okay, we rely on Tim Hawken account, or we basically create a dedicated GCP account and we do another domain validation.
all right. Then I will follow up with you on that offline. I personally, and I'm trying to get to a point, maybe it's a bad single point of failure, where there's one account that is like workspace super admin and also has the ability to hand out credentials for things like analytics and the Search Console and whatnot. And so I'd rather see if we can get that hooked up. But maybe I'm creating too much of a spoff, so we'll take it offline.
Okay.
Okay. Thanks so much for your time, Jim. I don't know if you feel like sticking around for the rest of this. It'd be great to have you, but I'll hand back to Arnaud since he's moved the agenda around.
Awesome, thank you.
Okay, my next item would be SIG meet and greet. So we have a meeting the same day, the first day of KubeCon. So I would like to basically see if we can do something virtual. And I talked to the Contributor Summit staff. There are no issue with run our own Zoom meeting. So I don't know if people are interested to have 1 to 2 hours of virtual conversation. So, okay, if I want to rephrase my question, how you want to do this?
I personally don't feel like I have a lot of time to put in more than the usual level of planning I have for the meeting, but I'm happy to stick around for extra time and have more of a larger open audience meet and greet type thing. I think that would be cool. Additionally, I feel like I've had a couple things that I've wanted to tee up for this meeting, just like walking through some of the code and sort of trying to talk out some of the vision on some of these bigger issues that I'd be happy to do during that time. So the only caveat I would say is I want to be able to say it's recorded. So attendees to the thing would have to be comfortable with it being recorded. Unless we feel like I shouldn't be talking about, plans and whatnot, and then I'm comfortable having it not recorded, but I still want to be able to, like, it's still a place on behalf of the project Kubernetes code of conduct still needs to be adhered to, all that stuff. I like the recording because it can keep us honest. You are muted.
Any suggestion?
Are you thinking it would be the same as his normal time?
Yep, but just an extra hour, maybe do that in 2 hours. So I don't know yet if I'm capable to do that. So the thing is, I want to basically like more like a conference or where people come ask questions about K8s Infra and we answer. We have questions about abstract ideas, what we want to we basically try to go over what we want to do next year. So we give an idea to people interested to work on K8s Infra. Something very simple and casual. No, not many bike shedding.
Sorry, so you're talking about the meet and greet?
Yep.
So as far as I know, that is not supported for virtual. So if y'all want to try and change that or do your own thing, but I believe the idea is we have tables set aside in a place, and these are physical tables.
Basically, none of the chair of or technical leads of this group will attend Los Angeles, so we want to do only virtual. And I talked to the summit staff about that, and they told me I'm fine to run my own things. So if we can have a meeting from 10 to 12, we'll be fine, or less on that. But just send a notification out there and say to people, hey, we have something during KubeCon, come and talk to us or come and ask questions. That's it.
Yeah, like I said, I'm super down. I'm fine with like having this meeting and then having just an extra hour after that and just kind of hanging around for whoever wants to show up. Like and I don't particularly care about having an agenda. I would say if we talk about future plans, I'd want to make sure that no decisions are made at this time. It's the sort of thing where I want to be inclusive. I think like it'd be a great chance to talk about ideas, hopes and dreams, ponies and unicorns, sports cars and horsies. So that sounds good. Like I said, my only formal caveat is just want to be clear. It's part of the project, so Kubernetes code of conduct needs to be adhered to.
Okay. I think from me that's all. Unless someone has a question.
I just wanted to follow up so it's on the recording. I went through the CNCF AWS account, and there are a bunch of certificates, a couple of which I pasted into chat. It sounds like they were automatically provisioned by ProwJobs for different things. So I count like 30 or 40 different certs throughout different regions. But none of them seem to be past 2020 November-ish.
Okay, that's good to know. I feel like we probably just ought to have a follow-up conversation to make sure they wouldn't break.
Yeah, I threw in chat there too. I'm going to try to capture these findings on the PR itself. So if anyone else digs up this old issue or digs up, if there's any sort of dust up from this, or even, 6 months or a year from now, capturing that in the PR as well as the case.io one. But it sounds like all of the certificate authorities that SSL tool that I linked in the chat there came back with are all at least accounted for with one way or another. And so it sounds like they're all valid, and we shouldn't really go about trimming down that list. And as far as we know in our purview, that list that we're providing for the CAA is accurate and valid today.
Yeah. Okay. I don't see Hippie here, so I'm going to assume it's Rian who's presenting next.
Yes.
Is that correct?
Hippie cannot be here today. He's got other engagements, so I'll speak on his behalf. He just wanted to mention before KubeCon, the Cloud Native Credits program that's going to launch at KubeCon, which is basically an initiative from the CNCF where they want to include all providers out there, either through donation of infrastructure, people, or cash donations towards infrastructure to expand the whole open source community. And he's driving very hard to get specifically the Kubernetes way of thinking, the Kubernetes way of working, and our code of conduct that we're adhering to, and get other communities to copy that and do it the same way we do it and be excellent to each other. So he's driving that quite hard with the CNCF, and just letting the folks at Infra know that we're pushing this way beyond us, and make sure that everybody that's doing open source cloudy things in cooperation with us and the CNCF will have the infrastructure, the people, the support to do great things. So that's what it's all about. So have a look out for that at the CNCF Cloud Native Conference.
Awesome.
And if your employer is available to do some things in this space, there will be a page where you click and we will talk to you about the great things you want to contribute. So that's fantastic. So
okay,
that is it on that topic. Then I can speak to the next topic as well. Any questions there? Any comments?
Not at the moment. I'm pretty psyched about it. I've worked a little bit offline with Hippie on this, and yeah, I feel pretty good about the way we do things around here. Be cool to see more of that.
Yeah, no, he's really trying to get that culture cultivated everywhere where we are. So yeah, thanks for everybody for cultivating that within our group. Then the next topic is carried over from last week. I had a look at the data logs for downloading artifacts, and just an interesting thing that I noted in August, there's quite a big drop in the number of downloads, but cost stayed roughly the same, which was interesting. So if anybody wish to comment on that, there's, other than that funny little spike there, there's nothing really interesting ongoing. I did try to get the slides to load to show you where we are now, but it is sticky because we have in Data Studios 26 billion rows of data that's being processed now to get this report out. So it's really a massive amount. We're talking since April, we're talking about 85 million gigabytes of data, 13 million unique IP addresses, and 710 images, unique images that's been downloaded. So that's just some information to share there. Unfortunately, I can't get the live data to come up to show because Data Studio is just struggling. It's been struggling for an hour now just to visualize the information.
That's fair. It's good to know. Might be maybe we need to think sooner rather than later about how to sort of aggregate and roll that data up historically.
There would be some smarter ways to deal with the data. And then also out of this information, we are talking to all different providers to try and see how we can get the cost and the amount, the traffic shaped in a way that's going to be beneficial for the community. So by the time we want to get the release artifacts over, we have some sufficient room for that to get into our budget as well.
Awesome.
That's all from my side. Yeah.
Okay. I was riffing a little bit about this earlier before we actually clicked record, but I just wanted to congratulate everybody on being members or attending your first meeting at Kubernetes' newest SIG K8s Infra. And I wanted to congratulate Arnaud on being the one of the inaugural chairs of SIG K8s Infra. So everybody give Arnaud a hand. Yeah. He's yes. Feel the awkward. And I am here as one of your inaugural technical leads for SIG K8s Infra. I viewed it largely as like changing the letters in front of the words K8s Infra and just kind of formalizing or restating the work that it is that we do here. But it appeared to trigger a lot of sort of discussion amongst our stakeholder SIGs and other people who were interested in what was going on here. I hadn't talked much about it here because I didn't necessarily want to bore you with the changing of letters. But if anybody has any questions about what this all means or what happens now, I don't know. Feel free to ask away. Okay. Glad we're all on the same page there. I think the main thing for anybody who's interested is I spent some time sort of rewriting our charter to specifically call out the like points of collaboration with other SIGs and stuff. And I think the biggest, probably the biggest point of clarification or confusion was that what we are most responsible for is infrastructure. If you think of infrastructure as something that comes from infrastructure as a service providers, or basically from cloud providers. But it's more than just the management of like compute and network and storage, because clouds offer so much more than just raw compute, network, and storage. And so we're responsible for the management and health of anything you could reasonably expect to provision from a cloud. But that boundary is drawn to signify that we do not, for example, manage Netlify, we don't manage GitHub, we don't manage Slack. Like the tools that do that run on top of the infrastructure that we provide. Like we make sure that there is a GKE cluster that can be accessed by the appropriate people, so on and so forth. Yes, sadly, we don't yet offer blockchain as a service, but you know, PR is welcome. Okay. If anybody has any questions, for sure, like hit me up offline or whatever, or hit up Arnaud. I really want to thank Arnaud for pushing me to get this done. I think it was long overdue, and I'm glad we are now a SIG. So I wanted to quickly whip through a couple things. I will try to take no more than 7 minutes to do this. We will see. Arnaud, I see you have a raised hand.
I just want to add something to everything you say. Is one thing people need to understand and maybe keep in mind is the current charter will be subject to evolution because the mission may shift over the next months. So historically, the mission of this group was migration from Google to, let's say, a Google organization to a community organization. And we're working on that, but once the migration is over, the main role of this group will be to maintain, operate, and evolve, also build the new services for the community. So the current charter describes two aspects of this group. So the migration and the current state of K8s Infra. That's what I want to add. So if you have any question, feel free to hit me.
Yeah, I think that's a very important point. Okay. I still personally prioritize like moving stuff over more than I prioritize adding new stuff. But I've started to prioritize like reducing the tech debt and operational load of the stuff we already have moved over as well. Okay. So a couple things you all may or may not be aware of sharing screen. So I have links to all of the issues here for most of these things under done since we last met. But the stuff I might click through to actually show them may be slightly different. So Lubomir opened an issue a while ago about how groups.yaml might be difficult to maintain. Groups.yaml was like the one single file where we managed all of our Kubernetes.io Google groups. And then eventually, after much pleading and asking, Nikita implemented a restrictions mechanism, which allowed us to say that groups could be defined in subdirectories of groups, subject to restrictions that are defined in a file at root. So the idea is root approvers get to define when somebody is allowed to like add a new group or not. This is way too small for you all to see. So for example, like the code of conduct committee is the only location that's allowed to manage the conduct at Kubernetes.io group. It also means this file also means that somebody can't create bananas at Kubernetes.io. It's got to land in this file, and somebody at root has to be able to approve this for that to go through. What this means as a result is, I'll pick on SIG release because they have been using it the most already. SIG release is able to approve changes to group memberships that they own without having to bug anybody. The owner's files here, basically the SIG release leads have approval rights to groups. I have greatly, it took a little while to like shuffle everything into these subdirectories, but it's worth it because now I don't have nearly as many PRs that I have to handle. It means that if you're part of a SIG, you can totally manage your groups way faster. It's the same sort of self-service model we use for crowd jobs. Another one that recently happened, shiny graphs. So basically, when we first provisioned Prow a while ago, we ran into problems of like capacity issues, and it seemed like we were definitely giving Prow jobs sufficient memory and CPU capacity, but I saw these like big scary graphs here about throttled IO, I guess, sort of what's the most throttling that any given node has seen in terms of the number of operations it's making or the bytes that it's reading or writing. And this was going up over time. We tried flipping around a number of different disk configurations. The number of IOPS that's given to a given, GCP instance depends on how many CPUs it has. That defines how much network it's able to use, which defines how quickly it can talk to network attached storage, which is all that was available for GKE nodes for a while. But a couple releases ago, GKE added the ability to provision nodes with local SSDs set up as ephemeral storage, which provide an order of magnitude more performance for IO. So I did a quick experiment. The old network attached SSDs on the left, the new local SSDs attached on the right. You can see there's way less throttling happening. So we migrated everything over. I managed to cost out that it actually costs us slightly less money for this setup, and we get significantly better IO. You can see, yay, shiny graph where the amount of throttled IO dropped. So most of our jobs really aren't throttled anymore. What remains is throttling that happens when a node is first provisioned during auto scaling, which is super cool. Sadly, I haven't actually seen much of a performance change in our jobs. So I'm not sure that IO was really the point of contention that everybody was hoping or thinking that it would be. But I'm glad to at least have taken that off the table. So as we look to optimize our jobs to have people waiting around less time for their PRs to merge, we can figure out what the actual things are we should be optimizing. Just wanted to shout out a contributor who's taken up the fact that we have this groups reconciler that reconciles all those groups using all those YAML files that I said. But there are no unit tests for the reconciler itself. We have like a couple tests to make sure that the YAML files are formatted correctly, but we don't have any unit tests that define that the reconciler won't accidentally all of the groups. And so we've had somebody who's sort of broke up the code into more mockable pieces, so we can actually swap out a mock service for a live service and start to make sure that things don't accidentally get deleted. This is a great example of somebody coming in and providing us code that we really, really need. So we are able to gain more confidence in moving faster. And it's basically just writing unit tests and making the code better, which I feel like is a pretty low barrier to entry. We finally wrote down and documented our policy for what is allowed to be a staging project. I put up the straw man over here. In this PR, let's see, what file did I actually update? This. Under the requirements heading, basically you get to have a staging project if it is to host images that are created by code that lives in one of the GitHub organizations that the Kubernetes project manages. Which GitHub organizations are those? You click this link and you see it's one of these: Kubernetes, Kubernetes client, CSI, SIGs. I'm gonna ignore these other two. But basically, them's the rules. And then, so examples of what that means is like Cryo used to be part of Kubernetes, but is now its own project. It's not part of Kubernetes anymore, so it shouldn't get a staging project. But we do allow for exceptions on this on a case-by-case basis. For example, we do host mirrors for etcd and core DNS, since the images for those are bundled up as part of the Kubernetes release. This is the fun, exciting policy work we do here at SIG K8s Infra, but hopefully it helps people understand whether they are or are not allowed to use services like this that we provide. I just wanted to give a shout out to everybody who helped this one get this one over the line. So back in January, we renamed the default branch for this for the repository that we work on. We renamed it from master to main, and that process was relatively quick. We got most of it done within a month or so. This was like the first repo to actually make the move, so we stumbled into all the little roadblocks. But the much harder, annoying thing was everybody links to our repo, and they all use master when they do it. And so I finally managed to use cs.k8s.io to generate a checklist, and these were all of the repositories that needed pull requests made against them. And so I just wanted to shout out in the bottom here, everybody listed here helped open pull requests to get this over the line. And finally, when you use Kubernetes /k8s.io, you always use main in the same sentence. So thank you to everybody who did that. I wanted to give a shout out to Eddie Zane. There's Zaneski, sorry, your username is Eddie Zane. You put up triage party for SIG CLI. Hooray. While I have you both here, I'm curious, Arno and Eddie, did you all figure out like which GitHub token is backing this up? Is this the same token that's used for the release triage instance?
Yes, we just, because now GitHub API is just, I think, 5,000 requests per hour for the same user. So we are fine for the moment.
Okay. Awesome. And then I wanted to give a big thanks to Arno. I did a tiny amount of lifting to get this over the line, but it was mostly Arno. We have, well, I guess all I can show you is the login screen. I'll try to authorize Electo to look at it. Welcome. I've logged into the Electo app. I get to sit back and relax because there is not to do yet. But this is going to be where we do voting for the Kubernetes Steering Committee elections. We had to figure out how to provision infrastructure that we have not provisioned before and how to wire things up that we haven't wired up before. So huge kudos and thanks to Arnaud for doing this. Okay. Next, I wanted to, so this is basically like walking the board, but using a Google Doc. I walked through everything that was done since we last talked. I wanted to walk through and try and unblock things since we last talked. So we already unblocked on the DNS stuff. I wanted to just check in on migrating cs.k8s.io to K8s Infra. I have seen PRs from Jim, the second, the first, whichever. Arnaud has his hand up, so I think I'm going to defer to Arnaud. Take it from here.
So basically, I went to the Contribus meeting today, and I asked if they are interested to basically be the SIG owning consortium. So for the record, anything running inside K8s Infra need to be owned by a SIG or a working group. So I asked to SIG Contribus, the SIG chair and the technical leads need to discuss about this. But ultimately, now we are a SIG, we can be the SIG owning consortium.
Okay.
So my question is, are we waiting for Contribus to make a decision, or are we unblocking Jim?
I would rather unblock Jim. I feel like my main question that I have is just because I'm like super curious or worried about performance differences, I wonder how y'all felt about standing this up at like a slightly different domain for a little bit so we could make sure that this works before we take away cs.k8s.io or before we shift traffic over. I only say this because I really, really depend on cs.k8s.io a lot. So I will definitely use the canary, but if the canary is broken, I want to be able to switch back to the normal thing.
I think that's the comment I made to in the pull request. I suggest you use a canary comment for that.
Yeah, and that was totally my intention, is get it stood up. We can test it in whatever canary format we want. I wouldn't be comfortable doing a cutover like right away. I would want some other tests.
I figured y'all like, I just haven't looked at the PRs yet. So if me looking at the PRs is part of what's blocking this, I will seek to review them. But I think I would kind of prefer SIG contributor experience own this if they are comfortable, but if it's about unblocking you, I'm cool saying like, we're the SIG for now. It's really not hard to change the labels later. It's totally fine.
So now I'm begging Jim to give me 24 hours to talk to the technical leads. And okay, so.
Yeah, whenever. I'll keep fighting the merge conflicts as needed.
Much appreciated. The other one was something I said I would have an update on by this time. I don't have much of an update. So this is basically, I kind of need to really help us figure out what is the plan for proud.k8s.io? Like, are we actually going to try and cut this over before some critical date in the 123 release schedule? And if we are, how are we going to do that? So I have been furiously proceeding on like it looks like I'm shuffling around a lot of little things at times, but this is really me realizing there are blockers that we haven't fully articulated yet. So I tried to dump them here. And I tried to break it up into sort of two categories. Like, if we were to migrate Proud.K8s, like, let's just assume I could wave a magic wand and suddenly all of the Kubernetes components and whatnot that are Proud.K8s that I own run over in K8s Infra land and they're community owned. There's still a lot of jobs that aren't technically part of Kubernetes that run on that. And there are also a bunch of jobs that interact with Google Cloud projects and use service accounts that live behind the walls of google.com. And it is increasingly not so easy to allow something that is not google.com to like act as if it is within the walls of google.com. So like being able to write to a bucket called called Kubernetes Jenkins, for example, like that's something our build clusters can do right now. It's conceivably something we'd want our cluster to do, but the process to do that might be tougher. So essentially, like I've started triaging the things that might block us being able to run all of those jobs if we were to manage to provision enough capacity for them to all run like on community hardware. But I think like Kubernetes Jenkins is kind of a big sticking point for me at the moment because it's linked literally everywhere. Like everything links to Kubernetes Jenkins in its URI. And if we were to suddenly say like, no, you got to stop using that, you got to start using this other bucket, I'm not quite sure how we support redirects. So we just need some time to sort of think through the level of breakage that we're talking about. If it is a matter of like, we'll accept the breakage or whatever, but we do want to proceed with a like, shut everything down and turn everything up. I'm trying to articulate what are the pieces of google.com stuff that we would still need to be able to talk to running Prow in K8s Infra land. I see a hand from Eddie.
I don't think we have enough time to go through all this, but Arno and I talked about this earlier today. And one of there's obviously a lot to migrate, but moving the periodics and other jobs is a good place to start. We were potentially talking about maybe we can leverage the code freeze, code thaw period to encourage SIGs to like help migrate their stuff at some point. So
that's possible. Here's the other.
It's a long conversation. It's a very long conversation because one of the way to success the migration should be to finish the migration of the 2000 job the SIG use. So everything that rest is just Kubernetes Jenkins, and that's great. That's one approach. But the problem it's not the problem, is from my perspective, I don't think this K8s Infra can enforce a policy forcing the other SIG to migrate over the next 3 months. I feel like this policy should come from SIG testing, but I'm not sure.
Yeah, no, I'm totally happy to like take off my SIG K8s Infra hat and put on my SIG testing hat and say, yeah, I'm totally willing to like put out a threatening deadline that's like, we're gonna reduce the capacity of the google.com build cluster by like 4. Like we're just gonna cut it in 4. And who knows if your job will still run? We'll find out. But if you do actually care that it still runs, you can get it to run over here. I think that's a reasonable move or else sort of thing. But I feel like it's too early to make that kind of statement right now. As you say, I think it is a longer conversation. The other, I guess I'm kind of like reblocking here. The other thing that concerns me is based on our discussion last time we're really kind of thinking that we might be close to our allowable spend. And so I'm not sure that I actually want to work on shifting over too much more CI spend until we understand where we're going to find room for it. So I don't think it's necessarily a technical blocker. It might be a question of optimization. It might be a question of funding, or it might be a question of, project policy. Like, do you really need these jobs? Do you really need them to run this frequently or as pre-submits instead of periodics, so on and so forth. I had, I don't know. Wait, no, I'll just do it here.
Rianne, Hippie, and I talked yesterday too about getting the cost down. So Hippie's on vacation right now, but we're gonna talk again next week. And I think, yeah, that's probably a priority too, because once we get the artifact cost down, like that's a very big chunk of it. So
yes, I agree. So I created an issue a while ago about like, hey, actually it was about a year ago-ish. I think we should have a budget and we should make sure we get alerted if we're going to blow our budget. I feel like it is really important that we do that now. So I bumped this up to critical urgent, and yeah, maybe I should reconnect with y'all and Hippie to figure out sort of what the plans are to mitigate storage costs. But I just kind of want to be able to look at our spend today and be like, well, X% of it is this, Y% of it is this, Z% of it is this, and let's figure out like where we can optimize and reduce costs, and let's kind of project out what we think that means we're capable of doing. And so like I moved a couple other things into the blocked column on the board, and linking back to this issue as the blocker. Having said that, I will still try and think through and work through what are the like technical implications of migrating Prout, but it sounds like you all also have some good ideas there as well. So maybe I can, I don't know, draft a new Google Doc or pick up the old Google Doc and try to like start just the spitballing ideas there, so we can figure out what are each of the things we need to think through. Okay, I had it up. I just wanted to shout out that Eddie, UNRO did get K8s Infra Prow up and running. I'll do it again. That was super cool. So you can see its heartbeat.
That was stressful because there was no other way to debug it other than building a debug image or reproducing our entire IAM and RBAC. So I'm glad we fixed it. I added logging upstream, so hopefully that never stumps anyone again.
Just for everyone in this call, Aaron is happy because it's the first time we have two control plane of Pro against the same build cluster. So it was like it was not a conflict, but a disagreement we had, I think, 10 months ago. So that's why Aaron is happy.
Yeah.
And it's opened the doors to a lot of opportunities, because if we have two control plane against the same build cluster, we can mutualize the cost for a lot of pressure in the CNCF.
Yes. I'm going to stop sharing my screen there. I didn't even get through. I mean, I got through about half of the stuff I put down. I feel like I didn't get a great chance to go through all of the in-progress issues that we've got going on. So if anybody's interested, I linked the issues, and there are updates in pretty much all of them about what's happening for those. I also went through the board and some of the issues, and like if it seems like it's not happening, I just made an executive decision and like either bumped down the priority or kicked it out of the milestone. And if I did that to your issue and you really wanted to work on it, like, comment on the issue. If you want to work on it, that to me takes precedence over where it lives on the board.
Before everyone runs, sorry, I don't want to cut you off, Aaron. This has happened for like the past 4, 5, 6 meetings where we haven't made it through everything on the agenda. Do we need to consider moving this to every week instead of every other week? I know people hate more meetings, but I'll be that guy that suggests it.
It's going to drive me a little bananas if we do that. I think let's revisit that as a post KubeCon thing. I think it's a totally valid question for sure. The thing for me personally is like I already have a TikTok between this and SIG testing, so I'm already doing weekly meetings that have a fair amount of overlap on this. But I completely hear you, and I had other things to say and they've left my brain.
Can we have longer meetings, like 15 minutes plus of the regular meetings, like 1 hour and 50 minutes instead of have one every week?
I would be okay with a slightly longer meeting.
Yeah.
I think another thing that I am happy to do, depending on how many people here are actually going to show up for this meeting versus go hang out at KubeCon or whatever, like I've generally ceded to other people who want to do demos or talk about the latest cool thing or whatever. But I can be pretty hard about like, look, we got some stuff that we got to get through and we're doing this first. And this is what takes, this is the most valuable use of our high bandwidth time. I'm totally happy to do that. But you know, the other thing to keep in mind is like, I'm happy to talk about this a lot more in Slack and in K8s Infra. I'm pretty active there. It makes me slightly uncomfortable when it turns into Aaron's looking for LGTM channel. I mean, I appreciate all of you who do slap on that LGTM. It helps me move forward. And I generally hope great things. But yeah, okay, for real, we're over time. Thanks a whole bunch, everybody. See you all in 2 weeks.
Thank you. Have a good one.
Thank you. Cheers.
Bye.